Hi, everybody. My name is Andrew McCormick, and I teach 8th and ninth grade art here in Cedar Falls, Iowa. I've been asked by the Art of Ed team to talk just a little bit about how I run modified choice based art education. Specifically, I think because it is modified and because I do teach it at the middle school slash high school level. Our school is a little bit unique that we have 8th and ninth graders in the same building, so technically the ninth graders are getting high school credit and they're called or considered high school students by all their GPA, and eighth grade is still that middle school age. But that's I teach eighth and ninth grade. um, I think maybe first I'll talk a little bit about the evolution of kind of what I've done with choice-based ed, and then kind of how I see it working, or let me take that back, how it works for me, because I want to stress this. Every classroom, it has to work a little bit differently. Now, wrongly or rightly, I think there's this perception that TAB has stations, and my room is incredibly tiny. It's cluttered. I have really full class sizes for the size of room I have, and stations just it won't physically work in my room. So instead, I've kind of taken this approach that I think gets at some of the meat of what TAB is, getting kids to think and act like artists without having to set up stations. So I think that you know that worked for me. And what I guess I want to stress is that everyone kind of does what worked for them. I'd say it was about 2 years ago. I did a project kind of based off a sci-fi TV show called Face Off, where the students made zombie heads with styrofoam models. Um, the following year, there was a competition at the local library based around the theme of steampunk zombies, and I was just blown away, and that was so up my alley that I knew that I wanted to do something. Now the problem was, though, my eighth graders the previous year had done the zombie heads, so in ninth grade I kind of didn't really know exactly what I wanted them to do, but I knew that I wanted them to take about a week, or I'm sorry, about a month, a couple weeks, 2-3 weeks to make something to fit that show. So I really just I got on Pinterest, which I think for a modified choice person, and really any art teacher, is just a really great asset, a great tool. You find all these great artists and designers and ideas out there. So I made a board, zombie steampunk, and I was just finding tons of stuff. And the thought dawned on me, it's like, why do I want them to do a certain thing? Like, okay, everyone's going to do this. I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to limit their creativity. For years, I'd been telling students, okay, we're going to do this project. Now, if this doesn't excite you or you don't want to do it, talk to me about what you'd rather do instead. Well, very, very few students took me up on that. They would just kind of do what I'd said or what I demonstrated, and really hadn't taken me up on that. So what I started doing with that zombie steampunk project for my ninth graders 2 years ago was I showed them all the different artists, designers, avenues, ways that other people had interpreted this theme. And I said, okay, I've shown you 8 different ways to do this. Now you get to pick which one kind of resonates with you the most. Which one do you want to do? And I was very explicit, and I still do this process for the most part. I said, okay, I've shown you 8, and option 9 is something that I haven't yet shown you, but in going through this PowerPoint, maybe something, you had an idea, you had an epiphany, a way you wanted to take it. That's always your option. And what a lot of students end up doing is they'll look at option number 3 and option number 7, and they'll say, I kind of want to combine those and make my own thing. It's like, that's fantastic. So on any given project, I'll have kids doing, a lot of times it does stick with 2D work or 3D work. I have had moments where I've had the majority of my students doing 2-dimensional stuff, and other kids go 3-dimensional, and that's great. I love that. But I'll have acrylic painting, I'll have pen and ink, I'll have black and white, I'll have graphite pencil, I'll have oil pastel, watercolor and ink. So I really, once they kind of have a vision of where they want to go, then I end up kind of letting them kind of run with it. Now what that ends up meaning is I will have to kind of do a lot of one-on-one demonstrations or a lot of one-on-one interventions to kind of show kids, okay, this is the best media for you, and you're not real familiar with that. And what I'll honestly do is I'll try to see, okay, do I have 3 or 4 kids that all want to do watercolor? we'll have like a little mini demo and everyone else is working on their own thing. Um, I think, the drawback to doing it that way is maybe as a teacher you feel a little more spread thin, a little more um, spastic. You're having to do lots of little tiny demos all the time. But the payoff is the student engagement is great, and they really start when you give them choices over their own subject matter or way that they interpret the subject matter or media. They start answering their own questions a lot more than they used to. The traditional way that I used to teach was do this, here's how you do it. If you do it the way that I showed you, you have success. Well, there wasn't a lot of creative thought along that process. And the other thing is the kids thought that there was only one right way to do something. I've got to do it the way that Mr. McCormick showed me. Well, with this new modified choice that I run, the students know that there's so many different avenues to do something, and they feel more agency to go out and research how to do it. They feel more okay to fail and find other solutions and change up how they're doing things midstream. So it's really been really beneficial. Now, I do want to say really quick that I don't, with the very first project of the year, jump right into, okay, here's a theme and here's 8, 9, 10. I've had 11 different choices of how to interpret it. I usually start with a pretty straight-laced project, a drawing, and I say to them what's important to me, what I'm tight about, to borrow the language of PLCs, is that this drawing has to explore an object, so it can't be out of your imagination, can't be from a photograph, it's got to be a real thing, that uses line and shape. So very traditional elements and principles, line and shape. I used to, or I guess I still do this, I bring in a lot of things that I think work. Predominantly it's stuff that I grow in my garden. I'm a big gardener, so I've got lots of produce, vegetables, things that have not only a fruit as a shape, but then veins, roots, stems, all of that stuff too. Now, I tell the kids, if this doesn't trip your trigger, doesn't do it for you, you got to come up with another object that you can tell me and prove to me has line and shape in it and is broken down that way. And we have a lot of different kind of various ways, but it's still a pretty straight-laced drawing project. Then I start to get more open-ended with the theme. Okay, here's the theme, mythology. The theme is zombie steampunk. The theme is identity. And I let kids interpret it different ways. I like to keep kids guessing, and sometimes I kind of counterpunch, or think of it as a dance, and I'll do different steps to keep them lively on their toes. So a lot of times, the majority of the times I would say, my choice-based ed is based on a theme. Here's the theme. Here's some examples of ways that other people have interpreted it. Sometimes, though, I'm tight with not a theme, but I'm tight with the media. And I've done that a few times. I've said, we're going to do something out of clay. I don't really care what you do out of clay. I'm going to show you some different artists and some different strategies, some different techniques, and then I let them run with what they have. And that really does keep them guessing. That first year when I did my big zombie steampunk choice-based project, so I saw the excitement grow, but more than that, I really saw and felt kids learning and thinking differently than they ever had before. Before when I taught, I felt like I had a classroom that was filled with students who were learning about art. When I started to do choice-based ed, I really felt like my students were thinking and acting like artists. It felt akin to what I had experienced and seen and worked with, both as a student and as a faculty at the college level studio classes. There was experimentation. There was research. There was, kind of spinning our wheels, and then everything clicks. And there were side projects. So I'd start this project, and I want to start this one. And that's much more true to what, quote unquote, real artists do. So I was talking to my kids. I think if you run choice-based ed, there's a couple things to keep in mind. But one of them is you have to have very frank conversations with your students. I sometimes call it letting them in behind the wizard's curtain. Not that I think of myself as a wizard, but the analogy to Wizard of Oz, like you're seeing behind the curtain how things work, right? So I told my kids, I said, now that we've done these projects that are a little more open-ended, I don't really talk to them about choice-based ed. I said, you've got these choices, things are open to you. I said, now that we've done this, it's really hard to go back to some really straight-laced projects, right? Like where I tell you everything. Like, yeah, they agreed with that and saw that. But one of the other, so we were to a crossroads, and I should say one of the next ways to do this was I just looked at my students and I said, well, what do we want to do? Because I realized I was doing a lot of the legwork at the beginning to gather resources of here's artists and designers that work with this theme, but they were still subject to my filter. These are the artists that I like that hit this theme. I was still picking the theme. So I asked the students one day, I said, well, we've got about 3 weeks left in class. What should our next project be? Well, let me back up. I was actually thinking of launching a couple different things, and it just felt like, you know what, I need to let them be in control of the theme, the subject matter. So the group came up with pop culture mashups. That's kind of what they wanted to do, and that bled a little bit into surrealism. And then I actually let them generate the PowerPoint using an app called Padlet, or a website called Padlet, where it's kind of like Pinterest meets PowerPoint. You can have lots of collaborators. You can have lots of different people putting up images on this board. And that was really excellent as well. And I use that quite a bit to let the kids drive sort of the ideation phase of the project. I think some closing thoughts on things to be mindful of if you start to run a modified choice or a true TAB classroom. Like I mentioned earlier, Pinterest, a huge resource. Padlet, also another huge resource. And I think going one-to-one and having kids be able to share Google slide presentations with each other. I do a lot of collaborative slide presentations that the kids make about their research. That's some resources, that's some technical things. I think there's some dispositions that you have to be aware of. Number one, you're going to have to let go a little bit of control. You're not going to know what every project's going to turn out to look like. They're not going to be mommy pleasers. They're not going to be little black dresses. I tell my students everyone looks good in a little black dress. I have projects where everyone succeeds and everyone looks awesome because the project is kind of foolproof. I'm not so interested in those anymore because I don't know that they've taught sort of the better skills, creativity, critical thinking, communication, collaboration, how to be flexible and adaptable. Some of these more open-ended projects that honestly might not look great are better at teaching those and letting those kids demonstrate that they know those skills. So you got to be willing to let go a little bit. A friend of mine had a saying that I still think about all the time. We need to not be the sage on the stage, but the guide on the side. So we are not the end-all, be-all locus of knowledge. We just have to help facilitate them to teach themselves and steer the content and steer the ship. The last thing is you've got to be, chaos will come hand in hand with that. And you've got to be more tolerant to a little bit of chaos. I know some of the fears that people have with a chaotic classroom is, well, I'm on a budget. What about your supplies? What about waste? I've honestly found that I think, because the kids are more invested in their artwork, they don't waste their materials. They know what they need. I'm still teaching them, to clean out their brush the right way and only grab enough of this that you need. But honestly, I think there's more investment, there's more care in what they make, that they're actually more mindful of their materials. Now, that might not be the case for everyone, but it has been the case for me. Okay, so, I think that's it. Feel free to send me an email. I know that I've worked with the Art of Ed before on some conferences. My email, my Twitter, my Facebook, my Pinterest, all of those things should be readily available. So if you have questions, you can look me up and get in touch with me. All right, thanks. I hope you enjoyed the talk.